And now, a passage from General Grant's Tour Around the World by W.H. Hicks from Chapter 19. Singapore was reached on the 1st of April, and a landing was made at this interesting point with the intention of passing a few days there. A glorious reception was given the ex-president here, in which both the English residents and the natives took part. A pleasant surprise was in store for the general, to whom was handed shortly after landing an autograph letter from the King of Siam, inviting the ex-president to visit him at his royal residence. The letter, which was enclosed in a blue satin envelope, ran as follows: The Grand Palace, Bangkok, 4th February 1879. My dear sir, having heard from my Minister for Foreign Affairs on the authority of the United States Consul that you are expected in Singapore on your way to Bangkok, I beg to express the pleasure I shall have in making your acquaintance. Possibly you may arrive in Bangkok during my absence at my country residence, Bang Pa Inn, in which case a steamer will be placed at your disposal to bring you to me. On your arrival, I beg you to communicate with His Excellency, my Minister for Foreign Affairs, who will arrange for your reception and entertainment. Yours very truly, Chulalongkorn, R.S. To General Grant, late President of the United States. This kind and courteous attention decided the general to make a visit to Siam. In the meantime, the party set about seeing what Singapore had in store for them. This island, which is part and parcel of the British Indian Empire, is situated at the southern extremity of the Malay Peninsula. Singapore, the capital, has an importance as being a touching place for all steamers going eastward or westward, hardly a day passing without the port being visited by sailing vessels or steamers. This makes it a lively residence place, but it possesses other advantages to make it a pleasant place to sojourn in. It lies just 1 degree north of the equator, hence it is in a region of perpetual summer, while its vicinity to the sea and its frequent showers, which are confined to no particular season, ensure it a remarkably even temperature, the thermometer seldom making a higher record than 90 degrees or falling much below 70 degrees. A walk through the city showed that it is really divided into 3 towns, each of which is almost exclusively occupied by a distinct race. Thus the western or commercial portion of the town was found to be inhabited by Chinese, the eastern portion by the natives, and the center by the European residents. Here the travelers saw for the first time the Chinese pagoda. What interested them more than the city itself was its suburbs, in which they saw growing a number of trees of commerce, with whose product they had long had gastronomic acquaintance. Groves of bananas and coconuts were seen, and the luscious fruit and creamy nut were tasted fresh from the tree. A grove of nutmeg trees was inspected one morning, and the fragrant fruit removed from its threefold shell, the inner case of which is the mace of commerce. A few miles from town a visit was paid to a spice plantation, where cinnamon, clove, and all kinds of spices were advancing to maturity. The variety and richness of the vegetable growth of the island surprised the travelers, who, in one day's wanderings about the city, saw a greater collection of different kinds of trees and shrubs than they had believed possible, among them the pineapple, breadfruit, coconut, orange, mango, coffee, chocolate, cassia, clove, custard apple, and a variety of shade and palm trees, too numerous to mention their different names. There is a botanical garden in the city, but the richness of the ordinary flora of the place made its existence seem almost supererogatory. A few days were very pleasantly spent at Singapore, and on April 9th the party started in a small steamer for Siam. Bangkok, the King of Siam's capital, was reached on the 14th of April. They were met at the bar of the harbor by the royal yacht, which had the American colors flying at the fore. A boat from the yacht brought to the tourists steamer U.S. Consul Sickles, the son of the foreign minister representing the Siamese government, and an aide of the king, who handed the general the following letter. The Grand Palace, Bangkok, April 11th, 1879. Sir, I have very great pleasure in welcoming you to Siam. It is, I am informed, your pleasure that your reception should be a private one, but you must permit me to show, as far as I can, the high esteem in which I hold the most eminent citizen of that great nation which has been so friendly to Siam, and so kind and just in all its intercourse with the nations of the Far East. That you may be near me during your stay, I have commanded my brother, His Royal Highness the Celestial Prince Banarangsi Swangwangsi, to prepare rooms for you and your party in the Saranram Palace, close to my palace, and I most cordially invite you, Mrs. Grant, and your party at once to take up your residence there, and my brother will represent me as your host, your friend, Chulalongkorn, R.S., His Excellency General Grant, late President of the United States. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a royal gondola put out from the shore and conveyed the party to the landing, where a guard presented arms and an excellent band played Hail Columbia as the general stepped upon Siamese soil. The welcome was most cordial. The foreign minister greeted the general and expressed pleasure at seeing him. He then presented the ex-president to his suite and to a number of gentlemen in attendance, among whom were Mr. Alabaster, the royal interpreter, and Captain Bush, an English naval officer in charge of the Siamese Navy. Entering carriages, the party were driven to the palace of Wang Saranram, where the reception showed that the celestial prince was determined to carry out handsomely the instructions given him by his royal brother. As the long line of carriages swept by the barracks, a salute of 21 guns greeted the general. At the palace gate, another guard was drawn up and another band played the American national air. Here the general was met and escorted to the palace by Pra-Si Damason of the Foreign Office, where the king's private secretary took the ex-president in charge and led him to the top of a flight of marble steps, where stood His Royal Highness, the Celestial Prince, Banarangsi Swangwangsi, a handsome young fellow of 20, who said that his palace was the general's home, and that he had been commanded by the king, his brother, to say that anything in the kingdom that would contribute to the happiness, comfort, or honor of General Grant was at his disposal. The general made a grateful response, and the prince, offering his arm to Mrs. Grant, escorted her and the general to their apartments, the members of his suite looking after the comforts of the rest of the party. In the evening, the general and party dined quietly with the prince, who submitted to his distinguished guest a lengthy program which the king had arranged for his entertainment, and which comprised 7 days of sightseeing. The general did not have the time to spare to follow out the whole program, as he was compelled to return to Singapore in 5 days, so that a few changes had to be made in the order of exercises. On the morning of their second day at Bangkok, the party paid a visit to the ex-regent of Siam, an aged statesman who governed the land during the minority of Chulalongkorn and was still possessed of great influence in the land. The interview which the general had with this venerable statesman was full of interest. The general brought a practical issue to the front and expressed a hope that the heavy rains which had fallen recently would not hurt the crops, to which the old gentleman responded that such would not, in his opinion, prove the case. Having taken a few whiffs of his cigar and sipped the cup of fragrant tea which formed part of the formality of the occasion, the general again tried to get the aged man to speak freely upon national affairs. He dwelt upon the importance to Siam of a fuller intercourse with the nations of the world. The old gentleman, however, was not to be drawn into a decided expression of opinion. In his opinion, Siam was a peculiar country. It was a country apart from the great highways of commerce, and peaceful itself, had no desire to enter into the strifes of other nations. In dealing with them, it had always endeavored to be friendly, and had made every concession in order to secure peaceful relations with them. In short, the venerable politician thought that the Siamese were a happy, contented people, and that the best way to continue so was for outside nations to let them alone. The King of Siam was visited on the 14th of April. The grand palace in which he resides was next to that of Saranram, in which the general was being entertained, and the party drove to it in state carriages. At the gate of the palace, where a body of troops were drawn up, an officer met the general and escorted him through an avenue of temples, shrines, and pavilions, and up a wide flight of marble steps to the audience room. Here the king, a spare young man, active and nervous in his movements, his prominent feature a sharp black eye that flitted to and fro among his visitors, advanced and shook hands with General Grant. Shaking hands with Mrs. Grant, he offered her his arm and conducted her to a sofa, in the center of which he sat while the general occupied the other side. A formal conversation ensued, in which words of welcome on the part of the king were gracefully responded to by the general and Mrs. Grant. On the following day the king returned the call. The ceremonies of the occasion were very imposing. As the hour of the visit drew near, guards gathered in front of and around the palace. A band of music took up position in the palace yard. Attendants bearing staves in their hands cleared the streets and announced that the king was coming and should be allowed undisputed way. A squadron of cavalry constituting the royal bodyguard, under command of a royal prince, preceded the carriage in which the king occupied a back seat accompanied by 2 princes. The approach of the royal carriage was announced by trumpet when the general prepared to receive his kingly guest. Colonel Grant, clad in the uniform of a lieutenant colonel, waited at the palace gate to receive the king in his father's name. The general met the king at the foot of the marble steps and conducted him to the reception room where, with the aid of Mr. Alabaster, the interpreter, quite a lengthy conversation was had. The general, in reply to the expressed hope of the king that he had been made comfortable at the Saranram Palace, assured his royal highness that nothing could be more agreeable than the hospitality of the prince. The king then referred to the pleasant relations which had always existed between Siam and America, which land did not look upon the East with any idea of aggrandizement. The United States were a nation to whom the Siamese could look for advice and counsel, and the influence of such Americans as had come to Siam had been of service to the people. General Grant assured the king that experience had proved that the United States policy of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other nations was a wise one. He stated that in his travels through India and Burma, he had been gratified with the commendations bestowed upon American products imported into those countries, and he would be pleased to see Siam sharing in this trade. This was as far as the American government desired to seek an influence in the East. The king appreciated the point made, and replied that it would please him to see the commerce between Siam and America widely developed. Siam was, in his opinion, a great deal like the United States in the fact that it possessed a large territory and a small population who as yet had been unable to develop it fully. A suggestion by the general that the introduction of skilled labor from America might prove advantageous elicited the further remark that the Siamese were a conservative people and never adopted anything until they had studied it carefully. A state dinner at the royal palace was the event of the following day. This was a grand occasion. The Siamese wore state dresses of gold cloth richly embroidered, and the king wore the family decoration, a star of 9 points, from the top of each of which glistened a beautiful gem, a diamond occupying the central point. There were 40 guests present, among them being His Royal Highness the Celestial Prince, several princes, members of the royal family of lower rank, General Grant and party, the American consul, Mr. Sickles, and Miss Struder, daughter of the consul at Singapore, Mr. Torrey, the American vice consul, and Mrs. Torrey, the foreign minister, his son, the king's private secretary, Mr. Alabaster, the members of the foreign office, and the aides of the king who had been attending the general. The table was a magnificent sight. The service was of solid silver, its prevailing design being the three-headed elephant, a part of the national arms. 2 bands were present, which played alternately Siamese and European music. At the end of the repast, which lasted about 3 hours, His Majesty arose and made the following speech in Siamese, which was translated by his interpreter, who stood behind his chair. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, now assembled, I beg you to hear the expression of the pleasure which I have felt in receiving as my guest a President of the United States of America. Siam has for many years past derived great advantages from America, whose citizens have introduced into my kingdom many arts and sciences, much medical knowledge, and many valuable books, to the great advantage of the country. Even before our countries were joined in treaty alliance, citizens of America came here and benefited us. Since then, our relations have greatly improved, and to the great advantage of Siam, and recently the improvement has been still more marked. Therefore, it is natural that we should be exceedingly gratified by the visit paid to us by a President of the United States. General Grant has a grand fame that has reached even to Siam, that has been known here for several years. We are well aware that as a true soldier, he first saw glory as a leader in war, and thereafter, accepting the office of President, earned the admiration of all men as a statesman of the highest rank. It is a great gratification to all of us to meet one thus eminent both in the government of war and of peace. We see him and are charmed by his gracious manner, and feel sure that his visit will inaugurate friendly relations with the United States of a still closer nature than before, and of the most enduring character. Therefore, I ask you all to join with me in drinking the health of General Grant, and wishing him every blessing. The general made a suitable response, in which he expressed the hope that there would soon be seen in America more of the Siamese, that embassies and diplomatic relations would draw them closer together, and that the commerce of both countries might thereby be increased. He desired to see the young men of Siam visit America and attend American colleges, as they now attended colleges in England and Germany. He could assure them all a kind reception, and that their visits would be both interesting and advantageous. In conclusion, he asked the company to drink the health of His Majesty the King, and prosperity and peace to the people of Siam. Receptions, entertainments, and excursions made the stay in Siam all too brief, and after a week's enjoyment, the general started for China, which was reached on the 28th of April.